"She is only a medic," the enemy commander said, laughing into his radio. "Send everyone. Finish them all." He had studied every soldier on that team. Every name, every weapon, every threat. He had planned this ambush for 3 weeks. He controlled the ridge. He controlled the road. He controlled everything. He had already won. Except he had never looked closely enough at the woman with the medical bag. Never asked why her hands were steadier than any soldier he had ever watched. Never wondered why she moved through gunfire like someone who had done it 1,000 times before. That mistake would cost him everything. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Her name was Captain Emily Carter. But inside the unit, inside the tight circle of men who bled together and breathed together and carried each other across the worst ground on earth, she had one name and one name only: Doc. They called her Doc the way soldiers call their medics, with affection, with need, with the specific kind of trust that only forms between a person and the hands that have kept them alive. They called her Doc the way a drowning man calls for the shore, without thinking, without hesitation, because she was always there and she always answered. She had been embedded with the unit for nearly 14 months. 14 months in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, 14 months of cold nights and burning days, 14 months of carrying a 60-pound pack across terrain that broke men twice her size. And in all that time, not once had she complained. Not once had she asked for easier ground. Not once had she fallen behind. But they never asked why. That was the thing about Emily Carter that nobody in the unit ever stopped long enough to consider. They accepted her the way soldiers accept rain as something present, necessary, and beyond question. It was Doc. She carried the med bag. She stopped the bleeding. She made the calls that nobody else was qualified to make in the field, the ones made in the dark with her bare hands and whatever supplies she could reach. She brought their people home. That was who she was. And none of them, not one single man in that unit, had ever thought to ask who she had been before. Sergeant Ryan Mitchell was the closest thing Emily had to a friend in that deployment. Not because they talked much. Most days they didn't talk at all. But Ryan had a way of sitting beside people in silence that felt like conversation. He was the team's best marksman, a quiet, methodical man from rural Tennessee who had grown up hunting deer in the fog before most kids were out of bed. He didn't brag about his skill. He didn't need to. When the team needed precision at distance, they looked for Ryan. When they found him, the problem was solved. Ryan and Emily had shared enough bad meals and worse weather that a kind of shorthand developed between them. A look, a nod. The occasional dry comment passed under breath when something went sideways, and neither of them wanted to make it worse by saying the obvious. One evening, 3 weeks before everything changed, Ryan had been cleaning his rifle when he looked up and caught Emily watching him work. "You want to look at it?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, you sure? Most people can't help themselves. Something about a precision weapon draws people in." "I'm sure," she said. He studied her for a moment. "You ever shoot anything besides a sidearm, Doc?" She picked up her paperback and turned a page she hadn't read. "I was an Army medic, Ryan. We qualify with the standard issue." "You know that. That's not what I asked." She didn't answer. She kept her eyes on the book. And after a moment, Ryan went back to his cleaning, and the conversation closed the way most conversations closed between them, quietly, without ceremony, leaving something unfinished in the air that neither of them reached for. He should have pushed. He would think about that later, in a hospital bed with an IV in his arm, turning the memory over like a coin he kept finding in his pocket. He should have pushed, because if he had, maybe he would have been less surprised. Maybe the whole unit would have been less surprised. Maybe none of them would have wasted those critical seconds, standing completely still, with their mouths open when they needed to be moving. But he didn't push, and so they didn't know. Major Daniel Brooks was the team leader, and he was the kind of officer who inspired loyalty without demanding it. He was 41 years old, 17 years in the Army, 3 combat deployments before this one. He had the face of a man who had made decisions he couldn't take back and learned to carry the weight of them without letting it show in front of his people. He was not cruel. He was not reckless. He was precise and careful and deeply protective of the people under his command. He trusted Emily Carter more than almost anyone he had ever served with. He had trusted her since the night, 8 months before the Valley, when she had kept Corporal James Whitfield alive for 40 minutes without proper equipment, after an IED shredded Whitfield's left side, across 3 different structures. She had used her belt, her hands, and narrated every step of what she was doing in a voice so calm that Whitfield later said he hadn't been afraid. He said he'd heard her voice and thought, if she's not scared, then I'm not going to be scared. He had survived. He was back home in Phoenix now, walking with a cane and sending pictures of his kid to anyone who would accept them. Daniel had watched Emily work that night and understood something that he filed away and never quite examined. Something about her hands, about the economy of her movement, about the way she made decisions, the way seasoned operators made decisions, not by hesitating, not by second-guessing, but by committing fully to the next right action, as though she had already played the scenario forward and simply needed to execute the conclusion. He never examined it too closely. He was grateful she was there. That was enough. The morning the mission briefing came through, Daniel had gathered the team in the cramped operations room of their forward operating base and laid out the objective on the map with the kind of measured calm that made difficult things sound manageable. Asset retrieval, he said, intelligence officer embedded in Zartan Valley. His name is Khalid Rahimi. He's been running a source network tracking weapons movement across the northern corridor. Somebody burned him. His cover is blown, his network is compromised, and we have a 48-hour window before the people looking for him find him. We go in, we get him out, we bring him to the debrief team, and we're back here before the food gets cold. How's the route looking? Asked Staff Sergeant Cole Morrison, who was the team's communications expert, and the person most likely to ask the question Daniel was hoping nobody asked yet. Manageable, Daniel said. That's not an answer, sir. The route goes through a section of Zartan that's had some activity over the last 3 weeks. Nothing major. Mostly small cell movement, supply runs, the usual pattern for that area. Intel says the main fighting groups have shifted north. We're looking at a corridor that should be quiet. Should be, Ryan said from the back. Should be, Daniel confirmed, because he was not the kind of man who dressed things up. Which is why we move fast, stay tight, and get in and out before anyone has time to notice we were there. Any other questions? There were other questions. There were always other questions. But Daniel answered them the way experienced commanders answer questions that can't be fully answered with enough information to give people purpose and enough trust in his people to know they'd fill in the gaps themselves. Emily sat through the briefing in the third row. She had her notebook open on her knee, and she wrote down the medical considerations the way she always did trauma protocols for the route. Nearest surgical asset, blood types for everyone on the team, emergency extraction contingencies. She wrote steadily, and she listened. And when Daniel finished, she was the last person to close her notebook. He caught her eye as the room cleared. You good, Doc? I'm always good, she said. It was true. It was also, in the way of many true things, incomplete. The team rolled out at 400 the following morning. 14 soldiers, 2 vehicles, and the specific kind of silence that comes over people moving toward danger in the dark. Not fear, exactly, not quite. Something more disciplined than fear. An alertness so complete it felt almost like peace. Emily rode in the second vehicle between Ryan and a young soldier named Private First Class Marcus Webb, who was 22 years old and on his first deployment and who dealt with his nerves, the way a lot of young soldiers dealt with nerves, which was by talking. You think this is going to be clean, Doc? Marcus asked somewhere in the second hour of driving. Define clean, she said, in and out, no contact. Back to base, debrief, dinner. I think, she said carefully, that you should eat when you have the chance. Sleep when you have the chance and not spend energy counting on clean. That's not really comforting. You asked what I thought. I told you was quiet for a moment. Then, because he was 22 and couldn't help himself, Ryan, you think it's going to be clean? Ryan was looking out the window at the dark landscape moving past. I think Doc just gave you the only answer worth having, he said. So maybe sit with that. Marcus sat with it. He didn't look entirely settled, but he stopped asking. Emily appreciated Ryan for that, not for the first time. They reached the outskirts of the target village, the last checkpoint before Zartan Valley proper, as the first gray light was beginning to separate the mountains from the sky. The village was called Dahan Kalan, and it had been emptied by the conflict years ago and never fully refilled. Most of the structures were damaged. The streets were narrow and the walls high, and the whole place had the specific feeling of a space that had forgotten what it was for. Daniel called the team to a halt and gathered the section leaders for a brief update. Intel confirms the asset is in the third building on the eastern side of the main road. Khalid's been there for 6 days. He's been signaling clean so far, which means either everything is fine or everything is so far from fine that he can't signal anything else. Comforting, Cole said, we move in 2 elements. Alpha takes the building. Bravo holds the perimeter and covers the extraction route. Emily, you're with Alpha. Ryan, you're on the east rooftop with your rifle until we've got the asset and we're moving. Ryan nodded once. Emily said nothing. She adjusted the strap of her medic bag and looked at the village the way you look at a thing that is waiting for you. She felt something in that moment. Not premonition. She didn't believe in premonition, but something. The kind of feeling that comes when a body has processed information the conscious mind hasn't caught up with yet. The way a deer stops before it knows why. She breathed through it. She filed it away. She moved. Alpha element entered the village in a column, tight and quiet, boots on the broken stone with the minimum of sound. The morning was cold and the air was still, and the silence of Dahan Kalan was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of held breath. They reached the building without incident. They extracted Khalid Rahimi from a room in the back, a wiry man in his 50s, with gray at his temples and the eyes of someone who had been afraid for so long that fear had become something close to ordinary. He grabbed Daniel's forearm the moment he saw the uniform. They know, Khalid said. His voice was barely sound. They know I'm here. They have known for 2 days. Someone told them. Someone on your side told them. The air in the room changed. Daniel kept his voice level. How many? Many. More than you have. They are positioned already. They have been waiting. For what? For you, Khalid said. They wanted all of you inside the village before they moved. Daniel turned to Cole before Khalid finished the sentence. Get the team on alert. Tell Bravo we are compromised and we need. The first shot came through the window. It hit the wall 6 inches from Daniel's head, and in the same half-second, the radio exploded with voices Bravo element, screaming contact, multiple positions, and Ryan's voice above them all, steady and clear, sniper on the ridge. Northeast elevated. I have him in sight, but he's already. And then Ryan's voice stopped. Not faded, stopped. Ryan, Daniel said into the radio. Ryan, talk to me. Silence from the east rooftop. Then Marcus Webb's voice cracking at the edges. He's down. Doc, Ryan is down. Emily was already moving. She had cleared the building before anyone finished the sentence. She crossed 30 meters of open ground that was not safe ground where the sniper's line of sight was wide and unobstructed, and she moved through it the way she moved through every dangerous space without slowing, without flinching, with the absolute focus of someone who had already decided that stopping was not an option she was willing to consider. She reached the base of the building Ryan was on. She went up the exterior stairs 3 at a time. She came through the roof access with her bag already open and reached Ryan Mitchell in 4 more steps. He was alive. The bullet had taken him through the upper right chest, missing his heart by what a surgeon would later call a number that should be much smaller. He was conscious, barely, breathing in the specific labored way that told Emily everything she needed to know about what was happening inside him. Ryan. She was on her knees beside him, her hands already working. I'm here, I've got you, stay with me, Doc, he said. His voice was wet. I know you're going to be okay. I need you to stay focused on my voice. Can you do that? Yeah, a pause, a rough breath. Yeah, I can do that. Good. Her hands did not stop moving. Tell me something. Tell me anything. Tell me about Tennessee. Yeah, the fog, the deer, whatever you want. Just talk. Cold in the mornings, he managed. Real cold. You don't know cold until you've sat in a deer stand at 4 in the morning in November, and he stopped, breathed. Keep going, she said. I'm listening. She was listening. She was also sealing a chest wound with the focus of a surgeon and the speed of someone who understood that every second was a variable she could control and did not intend to waste. Below them, the battle for Dahan Kalan was beginning. Gunfire from 3 directions. Bravo element pinned down behind their vehicles. Alpha element trying to hold the building with the asset. Daniel's voice on the radio, controlled but stretched thin, running through options that were closing faster than he could name them. And on the ridge to the northeast, the enemy sniper hadn't fired again since taking Ryan down. He didn't need to. He controlled the battlefield without firing. Every route out of the village passed through his sightline. Every move the team could make was a move he had already anticipated. He sat on that ridge with the patience of someone who knew he had already won and was simply waiting for the other side to understand it. Emily, Daniel's voice on her earpiece. What is Ryan's status? Stabilized for now. He needs surgery. We have maybe 40 minutes before his condition degrades. Extraction route is blocked. The sniper has the main road covered. We cannot move across that open section without losing people. I know. Our options are limited. Without clearing the sniper, we cannot. I know, she said again. She looked at Ryan. He was watching her. His eyes were clearer than they had any right to be. Doc, he said quietly, my rifle. She looked at the weapon lying 2 feet away where it had fallen when he went down. Right, you know how to use it, he said. It was not a question. She was very still for a moment. The gunfire below them had not stopped. The radio was a constant stream of controlled desperation. The morning had gone fully bright, and the light was hard and flat, and the ridge to the northeast was exactly where it had been from the moment they arrived. Ryan, she said. I've known since the first week, he said. The way you look at terrain, the way you calculate distance without moving your eyes, the way you went still that night when I was cleaning mine. He paused for breath. I don't know what your story is, but I know what you are. She looked at the rifle. She looked at him. Don't you dare die while I'm gone, she said. Not a chance, Ryan said. Tennessee men don't die on Afghan rooftops. She picked up the rifle. The weight of it settled into her hands like something returning to its natural place. Like muscle memory that had never actually faded, only been covered over, set aside, allowed to rest beneath 14 months of med bags and suture kits and the deliberate choice of one kind of purpose over another. She checked the magazine. She checked the chamber. Her hands moved without being told to. Then she got into position. Below on the main street, Marcus Webb was pressed against a wall with 2 other soldiers. Unable to move, unable to advance, caught between the sniper on the ridge and a ground element pushing from the west. He had his weapon up, but he had nothing to fire. That wasn't going to get him killed. We need to move, he said to the soldier beside him, Corporal Davis. We are going to get overrun if we stay here. We can't move, Davis said. That sniper has the whole road. The second we step out. If we stay here, we die. If we move, we die faster. Marcus pressed his head back against the wall and closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. In that second, he thought about his mother. He thought about her kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, and the smell of it on Sunday mornings, and he thought about how strange it was that a person could be in a place so far from that kitchen and still be able to smell it. Then he opened his eyes and looked at the road and calculated how many seconds it would take to cross it and whether any of those seconds was survivable. He was still calculating when the shot came from the rooftop. 1 shot, single, clean, final. The pressure that had been holding the whole battlefield in place released all at once, like a knot coming undone. And the radio erupted. Sniper is down, someone from Bravo said. The sniper is down. I say again, the sniper is. A beat of silence. Who made that shot? Alpha element. Who made that shot? Marcus looked up at the rooftop where Ryan had fallen. He saw Emily Carter settle back from the scope. He saw her set the rifle down. He saw her turn back to the wounded sniper on the ground beside her and begin checking his vitals with the same steady hands. Marcus Webb did not move for 3 full seconds. He stood in the street with gunfire still coming from the west, and he stared at the rooftop and he felt something rearrange itself inside his chest. Something he didn't have a name for yet. Something he would spend a long time trying to name. Doc, he finally said into his radio. Just that. Just the word. Her voice came back immediately, calm and unhurried. Hold your position. The secondary element is still active on the west side. Wait for Brooks to call movement, Doc, he said again. Was that Marcus? She said. I need you to focus. Can you do that? He could. He was trained to. He pulled himself back into the moment and pressed against the wall and waited for Daniel's call. But he kept looking at the rooftop. They all did. Across the whole team on the radio, in the building, pressed against walls and behind vehicles all across Dahan Kalan soldiers who had served beside Emily Carter for 14 months, looked up at that rooftop and experienced, in different ways and at different speeds, the same fundamental shift. The thing they thought they understood about their medic was not the whole picture. The picture was much larger than any of them had seen, and they were only just beginning to see it. Daniel's voice cut through the radio. All elements. This is Brooks. Sniper position is clear. We are moving on my mark. Alpha, bring the asset. Bravo, cover our left flank. Brief waited. Emily, can you move Ryan? I can move him, she said. He's stable enough for transport if we're fast. Then we move in 30 seconds. Get ready. She looked at Ryan. He looked back at her. You're going to be fine, she said. I know, he said, because you're the one telling me. She almost smiled. It was not the time for smiling, but it was almost there. She checked his bandaging one final time. She checked his airway. She made the calculations that existed only in the intersection of medical science and combat reality. The calculations she had been trained to make and had never stopped being able to make regardless of what role she wore. Then she got him to his feet, and she moved. Below them, the team began to move. Not the frantic movement of people running from something, but the precise, disciplined movement of people who had found their opening and intended to use it. Daniel led from the front the way he always did. Cole kept the communication lines open and the radio traffic clean. Marcus Webb moved with a focus he hadn't had 20 minutes ago, a focus sharpened by the specific shock of a person discovering that the world was different from what they thought it was. They crossed the open road. They reached the extraction corridor. And for the first time since the mission had turned, they were moving toward home instead of away from death. But the enemy was not finished, and Emily Carter was not finished either. The Western element that had pinned Bravo was adapting. She could hear it in the pattern of the fire, the way it shifted, the way it probed, the way it tried to find the new edges of a situation that had changed on them without warning. They were confused. They had lost their primary advantage, and they were trying to recalculate. Confused enemies were dangerous in a specific way. They made desperate moves. They took risks they wouldn't take when they felt in control. Emily knew this. She moved Ryan steadily, and she listened to the battle around her, and she processed the information the way she had been processing information since the first shot came through the window, not with panic, not with hope, but with the particular clear-eyed attention of someone who understood that every variable was real and every decision mattered, and none of it stopped mattering just because tired or afraid or carrying someone who needed her to not drop him. She had been doing this for a long time, in ways that nobody on this team had ever known. And as the team pushed toward the extraction point, and the enemy scrambled to close a trap that had already been broken open, and the morning burned into full day over the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, Emily Carter moved through it all with the same steadiness she had brought to every moment of the 14 months before. No more hidden, no more covered, just herself. The soldier who had chosen medicine not because she couldn't fight, but because she had understood something about fighting that most people never reached, that the point was never to win. The point was for everyone to come home. All of them. Together, she adjusted her grip on Ryan's arm and kept moving. And the team moved with her. The extraction corridor was supposed to be clear. That was what the intelligence had said. That was what the maps had shown. That was what every piece of pre-mission analysis had confirmed with the kind of confident specificity that makes experienced soldiers nervous. Because experienced soldiers know that confidence built on paper has a way of dissolving on contact with ground that doesn't care what the paper said. Daniel Brooks knew it, the moment they turned the corner onto the secondary road, and the silence hit him like a wall. Not the silence of empty space. The silence of people who were already there and already waiting and already positioned, and simply choosing not to announce themselves yet. He threw his fist up. The entire column stopped. Nobody breathed. He stood at the front and he listened, and he processed what the silence was telling him the way he had learned to process it across 17 years of doing this in places that wanted him dead. Then Cole's voice came low and tight into his earpiece. I'm reading movement on the thermal, north side of the road. Multiple positions. They're spread across maybe 200 meters. How many? At least 12, maybe more behind the structures. Daniel did the math in the 3 seconds he had to do math, and the answer was not a good answer. 14 soldiers, 1 wounded, 1 ass set, 1 extraction route that had just revealed itself as a kill zone, against 12 or more fighters who had been given time to set their positions and who knew the ground better than anyone on his team. He turned back. He looked at Emily, who was holding Ryan upright with one arm, and watching Daniel's face the way you watch a person's face when you need to know the answer before they say it. She saw his expression. She understood it immediately. How bad? She asked. Bad enough, he said. Ryan tried to straighten. His jaw was tight and his face was the color of old paper, but his eyes were sharp. Options working on it, Daniel said. Work faster, Ryan said. I can feel my luck running out. It was the kind of thing Ryan said, dry, matter of fact, stripped of drama, and under any other circumstance it would have pulled a half smile from the people around him. Nobody smiled now. Because he wasn't wrong, and they all knew he wasn't wrong, and that particular truth was not the kind you smile at. Emily shifted his weight against her shoulder. Her mind was already running the medical variables. 40 minutes, she had told Daniel. That was 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes of exertion, of adrenaline, of a chest wound that had been sealed but not repaired, of a body working 3 times as hard as it should have been working, because the situation demanded it. She had maybe 20 minutes left before the math stopped working in their favor. We need to move, she said to Daniel, directly. Without apology, I know, he said. Moving into that corridor means contact. I know. And if we take casualties in that corridor, I cannot carry 2 patients and fight my way out. Emily. His voice was not harsh. It was the voice of a man being asked to say something he couldn't say yet. Give me a minute. You have 30 seconds, she said. Then I'm going to start making decisions for you. He looked at her for one sharp moment, and then he did something that surprised every soldier close enough to see it. He didn't push back. He didn't remind her of rank or chain of command, or the 12 different reasons why a medic didn't make tactical decisions for a team leader. He just nodded, because he had watched her on that rooftop. He had processed what that meant. And whatever reorganization was happening inside his understanding of who Emily Carter was, part of it had already reached the part of his brain that recognized competence and deferred to it when the situation demanded. Cole, get me a route. Anything. South, north, through the structures, over the ridge. I don't care. Get me something that doesn't run through those 12 shooters. Cole was already on it. His fingers moved across the digital map reader with the focused speed of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. There's a dry riverbed that runs parallel to the main road, 40 meters south. If it's navigable, it gets us around the north positions without direct exposure. But I can't confirm whether they have coverage there from the imagery, meaning we might walk into another one. Staff Sergeant Morrison said from 3 steps back, meaning we might walk into another one. Cole confirmed. He didn't dress it up. Daniel looked south. He looked north. He looked at Ryan's face and at Emily's face, and at the faces of 13 other soldiers who were watching him and waiting and trusting him with the particular blind ferocity that soldiers extend to leaders who have earned it. Riverbed, we move now. Emily, stay center of the column. Marcus, you're on her left, Davis, right. Ryan does not go down again. Understood, Marcus said immediately. Sir, Davis said at the same moment. And then they were moving again. The thing about combat that nobody who hasn't experienced it fully understands, the thing that gets lost in every movie and every book and every story told afterward around every table and every bar, is that it is not constant. It comes in waves. It has rhythms. There are moments of such compressed violence that time seems to stop, and there are moments of such absolute stillness that the violence seems like something that happened to someone else in some other life. Moving through that riverbed was the stillness kind of moment. Every step deliberate, every sound monitored, every soldier in that column so attuned to the space around them that the collective consciousness of the unit felt like a single organism moving through dark water, feeling for the bottom, hoping it didn't drop away. Emily moved Ryan. Ryan moved himself as much as he could. Neither of them spoke. The medical reality was simple, and she had accepted it, and she was managing it one step at a time, which was the only way any of it was manageable. At the 4-minute mark, Marcus whispered from her left. Doc, you doing all right? She didn't look at him. I'm fine. That's not an answer. She said, I'm doing all right. Keep your eyes forward. A pause. Then what you did back there on that roof. Marcus. Not now, she said. Firm. Clear. The way she said everything without cruelty, without apology. Later, when we're out of this. Then you can ask me everything you want. He accepted it. He moved his eyes forward. At the 8-minute mark, the riverbed ended, and Daniel held the column up again. He was 30 meters from the open ground that connected to the actual extraction point, the flat, exposed ground where the helicopter would come in if Cole could get a signal through, and if the timeline had held, and if approximately 9 other things had gone the way they were supposed to go. None of those things had gone the way they were supposed to go. Cole was on the radio. His voice was low, and his expression was the expression of a man receiving news he doesn't want to deliver. He clicked off and turned to Daniel. Extraction is delayed, he said. Daniel closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Opened them. How long? 18 minutes. There's weather over the flight path. They can't push through it without putting the aircraft at risk. 18 minutes, Daniel repeated. 18 minutes, Cole confirmed. Ryan heard it from 3 steps away. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Emily felt the change in his body, the tiny involuntary shift of a man absorbing information that makes a bad situation worse and choosing how to respond to it. She tightened her grip on his arm. 18 minutes, she said to him quietly. We've had worse. When, he asked. Give me a second, I'll think of something. It was the closest thing to humor she had managed since they entered Dahan Kalan, and Ryan actually exhaled, almost a laugh, which cost him pain that tightened his face for a moment and then passed. Okay, 18 minutes. 18 minutes, she agreed. Daniel was already working the problem. We cannot hold in the riverbed for 18 minutes. Too exposed on the south approach. If they figured out we went around them, they'll be sweeping south within 10. Then we need to find a position, Morrison said. There's a structure at the edge of the open ground, Cole said, scanning the map. Northeast corner. 3 walls standing, partial roof. It's defensible if we set correctly. How far? 60 meters across open ground. Morrison looked at the 60 meters. That's a long 60. Everything out here is a long 60, Daniel said. He thought for 3 seconds. Then we sprinted. All at once, not in sequence. All at once, so there's no single isolated target. Anyone on the north side who's repositioned doesn't have time to acquire a target before we're into the structure. It's not elegant, but it's what we have. Ryan can't sprint, Emily said. I know. Daniel looked at her directly. You two are in the middle. Fastest soldiers on the outside. We wrap around you. Morrison, Hendricks. Chen, you're the outside edge. You sprint. You lay fire on any north position that opens up, and you do not slow down. And if something opens up from a direction we haven't accounted for, Morrison asked. Then Emily handles it, Daniel said. There was a beat of silence. It was the first time he had said something like that openly. Not Doc handles the medical situation. Not the medic will be there. Emily handles it. As if the thing that had happened on the rooftop had simply been absorbed into his operational calculus without ceremony or fanfare. Slotted into the assessment the way you slot in any relevant fact when you're building a plan that has to work. Morrison looked at Emily. Emily looked at the 60 meters of open ground. Then let's move, she said. They moved. The sprint was controlled chaos. That's the only honest description. A column of soldiers breaking from cover and crossing open ground with a wounded man in the middle and an asset who hadn't run anywhere in 6 days, stumbling to keep pace, and the constant electric awareness of every position that might open fire before they reached the far side. They made it in 11 seconds. 11 seconds that felt like a geologic age. Emily pulled Ryan through the gap in the structure's eastern wall, and the moment they were inside, she lowered him to the ground and went back to his chest. His breathing had worsened. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, but measurably, and she measured everything. Ryan, she said. Still here, he said immediately. Good, keep being here. Doing my best. The rest of the team flowed in around them. Daniel posted security at every opening. Cole found a position where he could get a clear signal and tried again to confirm the extraction timeline. Morrison moved along the interior with the efficient restlessness of a man who needed to be doing something or he was going to come apart, and doing something kept him from coming apart. Khalid Rahimi sat against the interior wall with his arms on his knees and his head bowed. He had said very little since the initial warning in the building. He had moved when they moved and stopped when they stopped, and he had not complained and he had not panicked, which Emily found she respected. There was a particular kind of courage that had nothing to do with weapons or training, the courage of a person who understood the situation they were in and chose to keep moving through it with whatever dignity they could hold on to. Khalid had that kind. She caught his eye briefly while she worked on Ryan. He nodded at her. A small, serious nod. She nodded back. Marcus Webb was at the eastern opening, weapon up, watching the direction they'd come from. His breathing had settled. The sprint had pushed the last of the anxious energy through his system and replaced it with something cleaner and more functional. He was in it now, fully, the way young soldiers get into it when the theoretical becomes real and the train takes over and there's nothing left in the body but the next correct action. He heard it before he saw it. Contact, he said, voice tight and immediate. East, 2, maybe 3, coming around the riverbed edge. Daniel moved to him instantly. Distance, 80 meters. Closing, Morrison north opening, Chen west. Nobody fires until I call it. He looked back at the room. His eyes found Emily. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She was already moving Ryan to a protected corner. She propped him with his back against the most solid section of remaining wall, checked his seal, checked his pulse, pressed his hand once. Don't move, she said. Where are you? He started. Don't move, she said again. She turned back. She positioned herself at the east opening beside Marcus. She didn't pick up the sniper rifle. It was designed for distance work, and the threat was closing to contact range. She pulled her sidearm, which nobody in the unit had ever seen her draw in anything other than a qualification setting, and she held it with the grip and the stance of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Marcus glanced sideways at her. She felt the look. Eyes forward, she said. Right. The fighters came around the edge of the riverbed in a cluster. 3 of them, moving fast, because they'd found the team's trail and they knew they were close, and close felt like advantage even when it wasn't. They came around the corner and into the line of sight of the eastern opening, and everything happened inside the span of a breath. Daniel called it. The team opened up. Emily fired twice. Controlled, economical, precise. The contact ended in under 8 seconds. Morrison looked back at the eastern opening from his position. He had seen what Emily fired, and he had seen where those 2 rounds had gone, and his expression was the expression of a man recalculating the size of something he thought he already understood the size of. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He turned back to his position. Some things didn't need to be said out loud. Some things just became part of what everybody knew and carried forward without ceremony. Cole's voice broke the brief stillness. Extraction is confirmed. 14 minutes. Pilot says he can push through the weather edge. We have a window, 14 minutes, Daniel said. We hold this position. Nobody moves, nobody engages unless they have to. We give them 14 minutes to get here. And if more come before that, Morrison asked. Then we handle it, Daniel said. He looked at Emily as he said it. The way he kept looking at her now, not differently than before, exactly, but more fully, more honestly. The look of a man who had been respecting someone in a partial way and had just discovered that partial respect was a much smaller thing than the full version. 13 minutes. The wait is the hardest part. Every soldier who has ever held a position knows this. Moving is hard. Shooting is hard. But waiting when the threat is real and the timeline is unknown, and every second brings either the sound of rotors or the sound of more contact waiting, is the thing that tests a person at the level where it's not about training anymore. It's about character. Emily spent the 13 minutes with Ryan. She talked to him, not constantly, not in the focused stream of keep him awake clinical monitoring, but conversationally, the way two people talk when one of them is hurt and both of them are choosing not to think too hard about the specific version of bad that has been on the table since the first shot. You knew, she said at one point, quietly, not accusing, just stating. I suspected, Ryan corrected. He was looking at the partial ceiling with the specific stillness of someone conserving energy. For how long? 3rd week. You and I were doing a route assessment before the Konar mission. You stopped and you looked east for maybe 4 seconds, and then you told me there was a position on the ridge that would cover the whole approach if anyone wanted to use it. You pointed to a specific spot. Nobody learns to see like that in basic medic training, Doc. She was quiet for a moment. You never said anything. You obviously didn't want it said. I figured you had your reasons. I did. You want to tell me what they are? She thought about it. The sounds of the unit holding their positions filled the silence. Marcus breathing steadily at the east opening. Cole's low voice on the radio. The distant, not yet distinct sound of wind that might have been nothing, or might have been rotors. I was good at it, she said finally, the shooting. Genuinely good. One of the best in the program. And I watched what it did to the people who were very good at it. Not all of them, but enough. She paused. I watched them become the thing they were best at. Like the skill was bigger than the person. Like eventually there wasn't really a person anymore, just a function. Ryan was quiet. I didn't want that, she said. So I chose something that required the same precision, the same calm, the same ability to make decisions in impossible conditions. But the outcome was different. Saving instead of... She stopped. Instead of the other thing, Ryan said. Yes. He thought about this for a while. Outside, nothing had moved. The 14 minutes were ticking down and nobody had fired in 6 minutes, and the distant sound was definitely getting less distant. Doc, Ryan said. Yeah, you know what the difference is between what you did today and what I do every time we go out. She waited. Nothing, he said. There is no difference. You saved us twice today. Once with your hands and once with that rifle. And both times the outcome was people getting to go home. He paused for breath. Painful breath, but he pushed through it. You didn't become a function out there. You're still you. You've been you this whole time. Another pause. I just thought you should hear that. From someone who knows what they're looking at. She did not respond immediately. She checked his bandaging. She checked his pulse. She did the small, competent, methodical things that her hands knew how to do without being directed. Then she said, very quietly, "Thank you, Ryan." He nodded. He closed awake, she said. "I'm not sleeping. I'm resting my eyes. That's what people say right before they sleep. I'm not people. I'm from Tennessee." She almost smiled again. This time it made it all the way. 2 minutes later, Cole said, "I have rotors." The word moved through the position like electricity. Every soldier heard it, and every soldier felt the specific chemical shift of imminent relief, not relief itself, not yet, but the leading edge of it, the knowledge that the end of the immediate danger was measurable, in seconds rather than estimates. Positions, Daniel said. We hold until that bird is on the ground and we are loading. Nobody gets loose until we are loading. The helicopter came in from the southwest, low and fast, and set down on the open ground 60 meters from the structure with the kind of decisive commitment that spoke to a pilot who had made this calculation many times before and had simply decided to go. Move, Daniel said. They moved. The 60 meters back across the open ground was different from the 60 meters they had crossed going the other way. Going the other way, they had been running from something, running towards something that might or might not be safe. This time they were running toward the aircraft, and the aircraft was loud and real, and the rotors were throwing up a wind that hit them across the face, and the door gunner was positioned and watching the north approach, and everything about it was the specific relief of a thing that has been hoped for becoming a thing that exists. Emily had Ryan's arm across her shoulder, and she ran with him, and he ran with her. They did not slow down, and they did not look anywhere except forward. Marcus Webb got to the aircraft first and turned and positioned himself to help Emily get Ryan in. He grabbed Ryan's other arm without being asked, and the two of them loaded him into the aircraft with the smooth efficiency of people who are working toward the same goal and don't need to talk about it. Daniel was last onto the aircraft. He did what team leaders do. He counted his people, every single one, visually confirmed every face, and then he got on and told the pilot to go. The aircraft lifted. The ground fell away. Below them, Dahan Kalan shrank and became small, and then became part of the landscape, and then became a memory, already taking on the particular quality that combat memories take on in the immediate aftermath, both more real and less real than they were a minute ago, sharper in some details and already blurring in others, already beginning the long process of becoming a story. Inside the aircraft, nobody spoke for the first 60 seconds. Then Ryan, who had been silent with his eyes closed and his breathing measured, opened his eyes and looked at Emily and said, "I'm hungry." She stared at him. "You have a chest wound." "I'm aware of the chest wound. I'm still hungry." "You are absolutely not allowed to be hungry right now." "Doc, I have been running on adrenaline and whatever you put in that IV drip for the last. If you say one more word about food, I'm going to make your recovery so miserable you'll wish." "Okay," he closed his eyes again. "Not hungry." Marcus Webb, watching this exchange from across the aircraft, felt something loosen in his chest. The tight, compressed thing that had been sitting there since the first shot in the village. It didn't go away entirely. It wouldn't go away entirely for a while. But it loosened, and the loosening felt like breathing after a long time of not quite getting enough air. He looked at Emily. She was back to monitoring Ryan's vitals. Both hands, full attention. The rifle was back in its place. Returned to the wounded sniper the moment they boarded, and she was Doc again, their medic. Their battlefield healer. The person with the trauma kit and the steady voice. Except that she was also something else now. Something she had always been. Something they had just not known the name for. Daniel Brooks sat with his back against the aircraft's interior wall, and he looked at his team, and he looked at the woman who had saved them, and he thought about the 14 months he had watched her work, and all the things he had understood about her and all the things he had not understood, the gap between those two categories much larger than he had known. He thought about the night with Corporal Whitfield, the calm in her hands, the decision-making, the specific quality of her focus that he had registered and filed away without ever properly labeling it. He thought about all the moments he could trace back now with the new information and see differently, like putting a lens over a photograph and discovering detail that was always there, always present, simply invisible without the right angle of light. He thought about the question he was going to have to answer for himself, for the unit, for whoever debriefed this mission, needed to understand what had happened in Dahan Kalan and how they had gotten out of a compromised extraction with all 14 soldiers. He thought about how you account for a person who has been carrying a capability for 14 months and choosing not to deploy it, because the capability she had chosen was the one in her hands and her training and her commitment to a different kind of outcome. He didn't have a clean answer. He was fairly certain there wasn't one. Khalid Rahimi, sitting forward in the aircraft with his hands in his lap, spoke for the first time since the sprint across the open ground. He spoke quietly, almost to himself, and Cole was the only other person close enough to hear him. "The woman," Khalid said. "She is the one who cleared the ridge." "Yes," Cole said. Khalid thought about this. "She is also the one who kept the wounded man alive." "Also yes." Another pause. Khalid looked across the aircraft at Emily, who was completely absorbed in the work of monitoring her patient and was not looking at anyone. "In my country," he said carefully, "we have a word. It does not translate well, but it means something like the person who contains opposites. The person who can hold two truths that seem to push against each other and carry both of them without breaking." He paused. "We consider it a rare thing." Cole looked at Emily. Looked back at Khalid. "Yeah," he said. "I think we're just starting to understand that." The helicopter flew southwest. The mountains of eastern Afghanistan fell behind them. Ryan Mitchell slept, which Emily permitted because his vitals had stabilized to the point where sleep was what his body needed most, and fighting her on the question of hunger had apparently exhausted whatever reserve he had left for remaining conscious. She watched him sleep. She watched his chest rise and fall with the particular attention of someone who has made a person's survival their personal responsibility and does not intend to release that responsibility until the transfer to actual surgical care is complete and confirmed. Morrison sat 2 positions down from her and watched her watch Ryan. "Hey, Doc," he said, not loud, just enough to reach her. She glanced at him. "For what it's worth," he said. He paused. He was not a man who talked a lot about what things were worth, and starting now seemed to cost him something. "I've been on 6 deployments. I've served with some genuinely exceptional people." He looked at his hands, then at her. "I have never in my life felt as safe in a bad situation as I felt today when you picked up that rifle." He stopped, started again. "That probably sounds strange." "It doesn't sound strange," she said. No, she said. "It sounds like what it is." He nodded. He seemed to feel that the exchange was complete. He looked forward again. Emily looked back at Ryan. The aircraft flew on. And in the specific quality of silence that exists inside a helicopter when a mission is over, and everyone is accounted for and the ground below is no longer a threat, in that silence, something shifted. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, but permanently. 14 soldiers had gone into Dahan Kalan, understanding one thing about who was among them. 14 soldiers were flying out, understanding something different. And the woman at the center of that shift sat with her hands on her patient's wrist and felt his pulse, steady and real, and thought about what Ryan had said to her in the ruined building. "Still you. You've been you this whole time." She had spent years believing that choosing one truth meant setting the other aside, that the medic and the shooter could not occupy the same space, that she had to be one or the other, and she had chosen medicine, and she had meant that choice, and she stood by it with everything she had. But Ryan's words were sitting in her now, and she was running them, and she was discovering that maybe the choice she had made was never about becoming one thing or the other. Maybe the choice had always been about what she did with what she was. And on this day, in a broken village in a dangerous valley, what she had done with what she was had been enough. It had been everything. She checked Ryan's pulse. Steady. Strong for what he'd been through. The body's fierce insistence on continuing, which always moved her in a way she never mentioned to anyone. She looked out the window of the aircraft at the mountains moving past below. She breathed. She thought about what Daniel was going to say to her when they landed, and about the debrief, and about what the next mission would look like now that the thing she had kept quiet for 14 months was no longer quiet. She thought about whether that scared her. She decided it didn't. What had scared her, the thing she had been guarding against for all those years, was becoming only the capability and losing the person. Becoming a function, the thing she had seen happen to others. But Ryan was right. She was still here, fully here. Both of her, the healer and the soldier, sitting in the same body on the same aircraft on the same mission, and neither one had devoured the other. They had simply both been necessary, and she had been equal to both of them. The helicopter began its descent toward the forward operating base. The familiar geography of their home ground came into view below. Emily began preparing Ryan for the handoff to the surgical team, talking through his status in her head, organizing the information she would deliver, planning the transfer with the same methodical care she brought to everything. Ryan stirred. "We there?" he asked. "Almost." "Good." He was quiet for a moment, then "Doc, when I get out of surgery." "When you get out of surgery," she said, "you are going to sleep for approximately 36 hours. After that, you're going to do whatever the surgical team tells you to do, and you're going to stop arguing with medical professionals. And after all of that," he said, patiently, "the way a man from Tennessee waits out a person who talks too much when they're deflecting, you're going to tell me the whole story." She looked at him. "The real one," he said, "not what's in your file. The actual story. Why you left the program. What you were before you came to us. All of it." She was quiet for a long moment. "You think you want to know all of it," she said. "I know I want to know all of it," he said, "and I've earned it." She considered this. She thought about 14 months and what they meant, about the roof in Dahan Kalan and what that meant, about what it cost to keep a thing hidden and what it might cost to stop hiding it. "Okay," she said finally. He exhaled, the satisfied exhale of a man who has been persistent enough to get the answer he was after. "Good," he said. He closed his eyes again. The aircraft touched down. The doors opened. The surgical team was already running across the tarmac with a stretcher, and Emily was talking before they reached her, clean and precise, delivering Ryan's status in the language of medicine that had been her first language for 14 months and remained her truest one. Daniel Brooks stepped off the aircraft behind her and stood for a moment watching her work. He had already decided what he was going to say in the debrief. He was going to say that his medic had saved this team twice in one day, through two different sets of skills that she had never been asked to acknowledge simultaneously, and that she had done so with a discipline and precision that had taken his breath away, and that he intended to make sure the people above him understood what they had in Captain Emily Carter, whatever category they needed to file her in. He was also going to say that he had served beside extraordinary people in 17 years of doing this, and that he had never been surprised quite like this, and that the surprise had been one of the best things that had ever happened to him professionally. But that part was for the debrief. For now, he just watched her guide the stretcher, heard her voice calm and commanding over the noise of the aircraft and the tarmac and the controlled urgency of the medical handoff. And he thought about all the things he had known about Emily Carter and all the things he hadn't known and the vast humbling distance between those two territories. Then he followed his team inside. The mission was over. The story was just beginning. The surgical team took Ryan through the double doors at 847, and Emily stood in the corridor outside and watched those doors swing closed and kept watching them for a full 30 seconds after they stopped moving. She had transferred his care. She had delivered every relevant piece of medical information in precise sequential order. She had done her job completely and correctly, the way she always did her job, and now her job in that specific capacity was finished. And the people on the other side of those doors were qualified and prepared, and Ryan Mitchell was in the best hands available, given the circumstances. She knew all of this. She still stood there for 30 seconds, watching the doors. Marcus Webb appeared beside her. He had a bottle of water in each hand, and he held one out without saying anything. She took it. She opened it. She drank half of it in one long pull that told her more about how thirsty she had been than she had allowed herself to register while it mattered. "He's going to be fine," Marcus said. "Yes," she said. "The surgical team here is good. I've seen them work. I know they're good. I've worked with them." Right. He held his own water bottle with both hands. He was doing the thing young soldiers do after hard missions, where the body has come down from the operational high and the mind hasn't quite caught up yet, and everything feels slightly unreal around the edges. So, he stopped. She looked at him sideways. "Go ahead." "How long?" he asked. "The sniper thing. How long have you?" "Marcus, I know. You said later. But we're kind of in later right now, aren't we? I mean, we're back. Ryan's in surgery. Nobody's shooting at us. The debrief is in 40 minutes, she said. And I need a shower and clean clothes before I sit in a room with Major Brooks and whoever he's brought in from command." "Right." He nodded, took a drink of water. "Right, okay." A pause. "Are you in trouble?" She looked at him fully this time. He was 22 years old, and his face still had the specific quality of a face that hadn't had all the softness worked out of it yet. And right now that face was genuinely worried. Not for himself, for her. She felt something that she rarely let herself feel during a deployment. Something warm and slightly inconvenient. "I don't know," she said. And because he was looking at her with that worried 22-year-old face, she added, "But probably not the kind of trouble that ends badly. Go get cleaned up. We'll talk after the debrief." He nodded again. Then he turned to go. Then he turned back. "Marcus, what you did out there today." He stopped, shook his head like he was trying to dislodge a word that was stuck. "I don't have the right. I don't think I have a word that's big enough." She held his gaze for a moment. "You moving toward that objective today, instead of freezing against the wall," she said. That was the right word. He blinked. "You chose to move," she said. "That's not nothing. That's actually everything." She turned toward the corridor that led to the quarters. "Go get cleaned up." She walked away before he could find a response. The shower took 7 minutes. She kept it short. Not because she wanted to, but because 14 months of field deployment had recalibrated her relationship with comfort in ways that a single hot shower was not going to undo in one day. She changed into clean clothes, reassembled the professional version of herself that the next several hours would require, and was at the debrief room with 4 minutes to spare. Daniel Brooks was already there. He was sitting at the head of the table with a mug of coffee that looked untouched and a tablet in front of him that he wasn't looking at. He looked up when she came in, and for a moment they simply regarded each other across the table the way two people regard each other after they have been through something large together, and neither of them has processed it fully. "Sit down, Emily," he said. She sat not at the far end, not deferentially. She pulled out the chair 2 positions from him and sat in it and folded her hands on the table. "How's Ryan?" he asked. "In surgery. They should have him stable within the hour. The chest wound was clean through. No major vessel damage. He'll need time, but he'll come back." Daniel nodded. Good. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. We have 40 minutes before the S2 team arrives for the formal debrief. I want to use 20 of those minutes talking to you directly. No recorder, just us. All right, she said. Khalid Rahimi confirmed the asset betrayal. The intelligence breach came from inside the network, not from our side. Someone in his source chain sold his location. We were not compromised from within our own structure. He said this carefully, watching her face. That's relevant to know, she said. Then after a beat, is that what you wanted to use 20 minutes on? He almost smiled. No. He set down the mug. I want to talk about your background. Because in about 30 minutes, the S2 team is going to ask me to explain what happened on that rooftop. And I need to understand what I'm explaining before I explain it. Emily was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not hesitation but preparation. The sorting of things that have been kept in a particular order for a long time and must now be reorganized without losing their truth. I was in the Army Marksmanship Unit, she said, from 2009 to 2013, 4 years. I trained as a precision long-range shooter under the advanced program. By 2012, I was consistently performing in the top 3% of the program. My instructors were recommending me for a specialized role in direct action support. She paused. I left the program in 2013 and applied for the combat medic specialty the following year. Daniel was very still. Top 3%, he said. Yes, and you walked away from it. I did, to become a medic. Yes, he picked up the coffee mug again, set it back down. Emily, I have approximately 40 questions right now in 20 minutes, so I'm going to ask the one that matters most and trust you to give me the honest answer. Ask it. Was there ever a moment on any mission in the 14 months you've been with this unit where the situation called for that skill and you chose not to deploy it? The question landed in the room and stayed there. It was a serious question, and they both knew it was serious, and she gave it the respect of a genuine pause. No, she said. He held her eyes. Every situation this unit has been in over those 14 months was manageable with the skills and personnel we had, she said. My role was medical support, and I executed that role to the fullest extent every time. Today was different because our primary asset went down and the situation created a gap that I was able to fill. I filled it. Then I went back to my primary role. She held his gaze without flinching. If there had been a previous situation where my involvement would have been necessary to preserve life and I had chosen not to act, I would tell you that. There hasn't been. The silence between them was different from the silence in the aircraft. It was the silence of two professionals, making an accounting of something real. Okay, Daniel said. He believed her. She could see that he believed her, which mattered to her more than she expected it to. There is one other thing, she said. He waited. The reason I left the marksmanship program. She looked at her hands for a moment. First time she had looked away from him since sitting down. It wasn't because I couldn't do the work. I want that to be clear. It's clear. In 2013, one of the other shooters in my program, someone I had trained alongside for 2 years, went through a difficult period and did something that cost 2 civilian lives. It wasn't malicious. It was a mistake. The kind that happens when very specific training conditions a person to make certain decisions at speed and the context is slightly wrong. She stopped, breathed. He was a good person. He was a very good shooter. And I watched the program produce in him something that his own good judgment couldn't override in the critical moment because the training had gone deeper than the judgment. She looked back at Daniel. I wasn't afraid I'd make the same mistake. I was afraid of what it meant that the training could go that deep. I decided I wanted to train something else to that depth. Something where a mistake meant a person died on my watch, not by my hand. Daniel said nothing for a long time. Then, that's a heavy thing to carry. All the things worth carrying are heavy, she said. That's how you know they're worth it. He nodded slowly. He looked at her the way a person looks at someone they thought they knew, and are discovering they know differently, which is not the same as knowing less. When the S2 team asks me what happened on that roof, he said, I'm going to tell them the truth. That my medic, Captain Emily Carter, assessed a critical gap in the team's capability when our primary marksman went down, and she filled that gap using training and skills she legitimately possesses, and that her actions directly enabled the successful extraction of the entire team and the intelligence asset. He paused. How does that sound? It sounds accurate, she said. Good. He stood. Because it is accurate, and because you deserve to have the accurate version of what happened today be the one that goes in the record. She stood as well, Daniel. He looked at her. First name, no rank, she almost never did that. Thank you, she said, simply, without qualification. He picked up his coffee mug for the 3rd time, and this time he actually drank from it. Don't thank me. You saved my life today. Again, that makes it 3. He set the mug down. At some point, you're going to have to stop doing that, or I'm going to start feeling like I owe you something I can't pay back. You don't owe me anything, she said. I know that, he said. That's what makes it hard. The S2 team arrived at exactly 920. 2 officers and a civilian analyst who had the specific quality of a person who had spent more time looking at satellite imagery than at actual ground and wasn't entirely sure which one he found more real. They set up their equipment and their recording devices, and they went through the mission in the methodical, chronological way that debriefs go from the initial intelligence assessment to the point of contact to the extraction and everything in between. They got to the rooftop. The civilian analyst leaned forward when Daniel described the shot. Captain Carter discharged the sniper rifle belonging to Sergeant Mitchell. She did, Daniel said, and her background qualifies her for that role. Her background absolutely qualifies her for that role. The analyst looked at Emily. Captain, can you walk us through your assessment when you made the decision to take the shot? Emily walked them through it, clean, direct, sequential. Distance, elevation, wind variables, the specific position of the target, the operational window she calculated, the decision point. She delivered it the way she delivered medical assessments, without embellishment, without drama, in the language of someone who understood every element of what they were describing because they had been present for all of it. When she finished, the room was quiet. One of the officers, a colonel named Hartley, older, the kind of man who had seen enough that very little surprised him, looked at her steadily. Captain, let me ask you a direct question, and I expect a direct answer. Go ahead, sir. In your professional judgment, given what you know about your own capability and training, should you have been deployed in a dual-capacity role from the beginning of this unit's operational period? It was a careful question. It was also, beneath its careful surface, a question about 14 months of missions and whether the Army had been under-leveraging a resource it didn't know it had. Emily gave it the respect of a real pause. No, sir, she said. Hartley's eyebrow moved slightly. My role in this unit has been medical support, she said. That role has been necessary, fully engaged, and in my professional assessment, correctly matched to the operational requirements of the unit's missions over the past 14 months. Dual deployment of the kind you're suggesting introduces complications in triage decision-making, in role clarity during contact, and in the psychological dynamic of a unit that needs to understand who does what when everything breaks down. She folded her hands on the table. Today was an exception. Exceptions exist. The unit was able to adapt to the exception because the people in it are exceptionally good. That doesn't mean the exception should become the rule. Hartley looked at her for a long moment. Then he wrote something on his notepad. That, he said, is either the most thoughtful answer I've heard in a debrief in 15 years or the most carefully constructed deflection I've encountered in the same period. It's the truth, sir, she said. Yes, he said, I believe it is. The debrief concluded at 1,115. Emily walked out of the room and found Cole Morrison waiting in the corridor with 2 cups of coffee, neither of which was for himself, since Cole didn't drink coffee on principle, which meant both were for her. She took one. How bad? Not bad at all, she said. Apparently, Hartley is the kind of man who respects a direct answer, even when it's not the answer that makes his job easier. Hartley's been around a long time, Cole said. He's seen enough people try to be something they're not. He can tell the difference. He looked at her coffee. You going to drink that or just hold it? She drank it. It was strong and slightly burnt, and it was the best thing she had tasted in approximately 16 hours. The team wants to get together tonight, Cole said. Not formally, just together. Brooks said if you're up for it. He paused. Morrison's idea, actually. Which surprised me because Morrison doesn't usually. I'm up for it, she said. Cole nodded. He seemed relieved in a way he was trying not to show, which was very Cole. Good. 1,900 hours. The common room. She nodded. She looked at the double doors down the corridor. Still closed. Ryan was still on the other side of them. Any word, Cole asked, following her gaze. Not yet. He's going to be fine. Everyone keeps telling me that. Because everyone knows it's true. She drank more coffee. She thought about Ryan on the rooftop telling her he had known for 3 weeks. She thought about what it meant that he had known and had chosen not to say it, and what kind of respect that was, and whether she had fully understood until today what kind of person Ryan Mitchell was when you got below the quiet exterior and the Tennessee references and the dry comments delivered in moments of maximum stress. She thought she was beginning to understand. At 1,203, the surgeon came through the double doors. She was on her feet before she was consciously aware of standing. The surgeon was a woman named Major Christine Yu, who was 40 years old and had the economy of motion that comes from spending years doing very precise work in very limited time. She looked at Emily and she said, "He's out. He's stable. The wound was clean and the repair went well. He's going to have a significant recovery ahead of him, but he will recover fully. We're looking at a minimum of 6 weeks, potentially 8. Emily heard all of this. She processed all of it. She took in the surgical details and the timeline and the prognosis with the clinical precision she always brought to medical information. And then, for the first time since the first shot had come through the window in Dahan Kalan, something in her chest let go. It was not dramatic. She did not cry. She did not collapse or grab the surgeon's arm or make any of the sounds that the release of held tension sometimes produces in people. She simply stood in the corridor and felt the specific physical sensation of a thing she had been holding very tightly releasing its grip. "Thank you," she said to Major Yu. "He's asking for you," Yu said. "Of course he is," Emily said. Yu held the door open. Emily went through. Ryan was in the recovery room, which was small and clean, and smelled the way all recovery rooms smell, antiseptic and recycled air, and something underneath both of those that was harder to name and harder to ignore. He was propped at a slight angle, IV in his left arm, monitoring equipment steady and reassuring in its green-lit regularity. His color was better than it had been in the aircraft, and his eyes were open and alert in the specific way of a person who is coming up from anesthesia and is determined not to let anyone know they're still foggy. "Hey," he said when she came in. "Hey," she said. She pulled a chair to the bedside and sat in it, and looked at him the way she had been looking at him on and off for the past several hours, medically and also just as a person, both at once, the dual attention she brought to the people she cared about in this specific professional context. "Did they fix it?" "They fixed it. 6 to 8 weeks. He absorbed this. That's a lot of card game it is," she said. "You're going to get very good at losing." He almost smiled. "Doc, in the history of our unit, has anyone ever beaten me at cards?" "Morrison," she said immediately. "Morrison cheats." "Morrison does not cheat. He's just better than you." "That's not," winced. "Reset. That's not a conversation I'm prepared to have while I'm on pain medication. My arguments are too good for this state." She looked at his chart. She looked at his vitals on the monitor. She did the small, familiar work of confirming that the numbers matched what Major Yu had said, and that everything was moving in the right direction, which it was. "You said you'd tell me," Ryan said. She looked at him over the chart. "The whole story," he said. "You said, okay, you just came out of surgery, which means I'm in no condition to be lied to or redirected." He held her gaze with the specific stubbornness of a man who has been shot and survived and feels this gives him certain standing. "Tell me." She set the chart down. She thought about what Daniel had asked her in the room and what she had said, and the long accounting that those 20 minutes had required. She thought about how it had felt to say it not as bad as she had expected and not as easy as she had hoped, which was exactly the range she should have predicted. "I already told Daniel," she said. "I know. He came to tell me you were okay while they were prepping me for surgery." Ryan's expression shifted slightly. He said, and I'm quoting here because he specifically told me he wanted me to hear it exactly as he said it. He said, "Your medic is one of the finest soldiers I have ever served with, and I should have known it sooner, and I'm choosing to count that as my failure rather than hers." Emily was very still. "Then he left," Ryan said, "because he's Brooks, and that was apparently the maximum emotional output he had budgeted for the day." She looked at the wall for a moment, then at Ryan. "He said that, word for word. I was coming out of anesthesia and I was still paying attention because it sounded important." She breathed. "Okay," she said. She pulled the chair closer. "What do you want to know?" "Start from the beginning," he said. "The real beginning, before the medic, before the program. Who was Emily Carter before any of this?" It was the question she had been least prepared for, because the beginning was not dramatic. The beginning was a girl from a small town in rural Virginia who had grown up with a father who hunted and a mother who taught high school biology in a backyard that was large enough to practice with a rifle at distances that got longer every summer as her skill and her interest grew in parallel. The beginning was quiet and specific and belonged to a life that felt very far from an Afghan rooftop. She told him anyway. She told him about the father in the backyard and the distances. She told him about enlisting at 19, about the qualification scores that caught attention, about the marksmanship instructor who had told her she had a gift, the way some people tell a musician they have perfect pitch as a statement of observable fact rather than a compliment. She told him about the Army marksmanship unit and the 4 years inside it and the specific world of precision shooting, which is its own world with its own culture and its own particular pressures. She told him about the person she had trained alongside. She didn't use the name. She told him about the mission and the mistake and the two civilians and the investigation that followed and what she had watched it do to someone she had considered a friend. Ryan listened to all of it without interruption. His face moved through several things: attention, recognition, the particular seriousness of a person hearing something that deserves to be heard seriously. After that, she said, I sat in my quarters for 3 days and I tried to understand what had happened. Not to him specifically, to the process. The training had worked exactly as designed. He had exactly the skill set he was supposed to have. And in a specific high-pressure moment, that skill set had produced an outcome that nobody would have chosen. She looked at her hands. I kept coming back to the question of what training I wanted to go, that deep in me. What capability I wanted to be at the bottom when everything else was stripped away. And you chose medicine, Ryan said. I chose the thing that required the same level of precision and decision-making and calm under pressure, she said, but where the default outcome of the deepest reflex was to preserve rather than end. She paused. Does that make sense? Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I know it might look like I was running from something. It doesn't look like that, he said immediately. It looks like you were running towards something. There's a difference and it matters. He shifted slightly carefully, the way a person with a fresh surgical repair shifts when they need to, but are acutely aware of every movement. Did it work? The thing you were hoping the medicine would do? She thought about it honestly. Mostly, she said. I think the instinct goes as deep as I hoped it would. Today on that rooftop, the rifle felt like a tool. A necessary one. Not like something that answered a question in me that I was afraid of. She met his eyes. I picked it up and I used it and I put it down. That's what I needed to be true about myself. And it was. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something, he asked. You're going to anyway. True, he looked at the ceiling. After the first week when I started to suspect what you were, I had this thought. And I've had it about 100 times since. It was, this team is safer than we know. He brought his gaze back down to her. I didn't say anything because it wasn't mine to say. But I went to sleep every night for 12 weeks feeling a specific kind of settled that I couldn't fully account for. And now I can account for it. She held his gaze. That's not a small thing, what you gave us, he said, without ever being asked to, without anyone knowing to be grateful for it. You just carried it the whole time. He paused. That's a form of service that doesn't show up in any citation or any record, but it's real. The monitoring equipment beeped its steady rhythm in the space between his words. Emily looked at Ryan Mitchell, who was 29 hours past being shot through the chest and was lying in a recovery room, telling her that the thing she had spent years uncertain about was actually a kind of honor, and she felt the inconvenient warm feeling from the corridor again. Stronger this time. You should rest, she said. You always say that. You always need it, Doc. His voice was quieter. Thank you for not leaving me up there. I never leave my patients, she said. I know. A pause. But thank you for not leaving me up there as a person, too. Not just as a patient. She stood up. She straightened his blanket in the small, practical way of someone who needs to do something with their hands. Get some sleep, Ryan. Tennessee men sleep when they're ready. Tennessee men who just had chest surgery sleep when their medic tells them to. He closed his eyes. Fine, he said. Fine. She stood there for a moment after his breathing evened out. She watched his chest rise and fall. She counted the rhythm of it the way she counted everything methodically, with full attention, because attention was the thing that made the difference between things working and things not working, and she had never learned to give anything less than her full attention to the things that mattered. Then she turned and left the room. In the corridor, Morrison was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. She had not known he was there. She stopped. How long have you been standing there, she asked. Long enough, he said. He was not embarrassed about it. Is he all right? He's asleep. He's going to be fine. Morrison nodded. He looked at the door for a moment. Then at her, Doc. He said it the way they all said it, automatic, habitual, the name that meant something specific about who she was in this unit. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. That shot today. He uncrossed his arms. I've seen a lot of precision shooting in my career. I've worked alongside some genuinely exceptional marksmen. He looked at her steadily. What you did on that rooftop. The distance, the wind variables. The fact that you had been providing emergency trauma care for 23 minutes before you picked up the rifle and your hands were steady. He stopped. That wasn't good. That was extraordinary. She waited. I'm not asking for a number or a ranking or anything formal, he said. I'm asking because I want to understand what I saw today. Because I've been turning it over, and I can't fit it into a category I already have, and that bothers me. She considered him. Morrison, who did not talk unless he had something worth saying. Morrison, who had served 6 deployments and built his understanding of the world on the specific foundation of knowing what each person in his orbit was capable of. Morrison, for whom a category he didn't have was genuinely troubling. The hands, she said. You were asking about the hands. Yes. When you're in trauma care, the same physical principles apply as when you're in a shooting position. Economy of motion, breath control, the elimination of everything unnecessary. The hands learn the same discipline in both contexts. They don't know the difference between a suture kit and a rifle grip. They know precision, and they know steadiness, and they know that shaking is the enemy. She looked at her hands briefly. I've been training both sets of hands for a long time. They work together better than people expect. Morrison absorbed this. Something in his expression shifted, not surprise. Exactly, because the specific quality of Morrison was that he moved through surprise quickly and arrived at assessment. It shifted toward the assessment. You're telling me that being a medic made you a better shooter. I'm telling you that the skills share more foundation than people assume, she said. And yes, probably, he looked at her for a long time. Then he said, you know what you are, Doc? A captain in the United States Army, she said. That too, he said, but also the most quietly dangerous person I have ever shared a forward operating base with. It was so close to what Khalid Rahimi had said in the aircraft, the person who contains opposites, that she felt it land in the same place. You say that like it's a problem, she said. I say it like it's the most reassuring thing I've heard in 14 months, he said. And for Morrison, that was a speech. He pushed off the wall. 1,900 hours, he said. Common room. Bring yourself. That's all we need. He walked away down the corridor. Emily watched him go. She thought about what the evening would look like. The team gathered in a room that was not a briefing room, not a medical facility, not a rooftop in an Afghan village. Just people who had been through something together and needed the specific human remedy of being in the same space without a mission to complete. She had been to gatherings like that before. She had always positioned herself at the edge, present, available, slightly apart. The medic, the person who was valued and trusted, but not quite inside the circle in the way the fighters were inside it. She thought that tonight might be different. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. She had spent a long time constructing her particular kind of distance, her particular position in the unit's social architecture. She had done it deliberately. For reasons she had just spent an hour explaining to Ryan Mitchell, and 20 minutes before, that explaining to Daniel Brooks. But Ryan's words were still in her. Still you. You've been you this whole time. Maybe the distance had served its purpose. Maybe it had protected something that needed protecting during the period when she was still working out whether the trade she had made, precision shooting for precision healing, had cost her the things she was most afraid of losing. And maybe today it answered that question. She turned and walked down the corridor toward the light that was coming through the window at the far end. The afternoon was moving into early evening, the kind of light that comes in flat and gold through desert windows and makes everything look like a photograph of itself. She walked toward it. The light was warm on her face. She thought about Khalid Rahimi, who was in debrief somewhere in this base right now, delivering the intelligence he had spent 6 days hiding to protect. She thought about what he had risked and why he had risked it, and what it meant that people made those kinds of calculations, that information was worth more than safety, that some things were worth the exposure. She thought it was not so different from what she had done today, exposing what she had kept hidden because the situation demanded it, because people she was responsible for needed everything she had. At 1712, she found a quiet corner of the common room before anyone else arrived, and she sat with a cup of tea and she thought about what Ryan had said about the settled feeling. 12 weeks of sleeping better without knowing why. The team safer than they knew. She had given them that without knowing she was giving it. She decided that was enough. That was, in fact, exactly what she had hoped her life would produce when she made the choice she had made in 2013 in a room in Fort Bragg, with the memory of a mistake that wasn't hers still fresh enough to change everything. She hadn't become the function. She hadn't become only the capability. She was still here, both of her. All of her. And tonight, in the common room with the people she had carried and who had carried her through 14 months of the hardest ground either of them were likely to see, she was going to be all of herself, without apology and without the careful practiced distance. She was ready for that. For the first time in a long time, she was ready. At 1,000, 854. The door opened and Marcus Webb came in first, the way young soldiers always arrive. First to the thing they've been waiting for too early, trying not to show it, pretending they happened to be there. He saw her, and his face did the thing it had been doing since the rooftop, that particular reorganization of a young person, discovering that the world is larger than they thought it was. "Hey, Doc," he said. "Hey, Marcus," she said. He sat down across from her. The door opened again and again, and they came in one by one, the way they always came in, filling the room with the specific noise of people who had been through something together and were still figuring out what it meant, which is the noise that all the best rooms eventually make. Daniel came in last. He looked at Emily across the room. She looked back at him. He raised his coffee mug still. Apparently, the same mug, or one so like it as to be indistinguishable. She raised her tea, no words necessary. Some accountings don't require language. Some things are simply understood between people who have stood in the same place at the same moment and made the same choice to move toward rather than away. Morrison, from across the room, caught Emily's eye for exactly 1 second. His expression was what it always was, contained, steady, reading the room with the precision of a man who had been reading rooms for a long time. But there was something else in it now, something that had not been there 14 months ago when she joined the unit as their new medic. Recognition, full and unqualified, the room filled, and Emily Carter sat in the middle of it, not at the edge, not slightly apart, and let it. The common room stayed loud until past 2,200. That was unusual. On a normal night after a hard mission, soldiers ate, debriefed informally among themselves, and went to sleep with the specific efficiency of people whose bodies had decided the conversation was over, regardless of what their minds wanted. Sleep was not optional in this life. It was operational. You got it when you could because you never knew when you couldn't. But this was not a normal night. Nobody wanted to leave. Not because the room was comfortable, it wasn't. The chairs were what they always were, and the lighting was what it always was. And there was nothing about the physical space that justified staying past the point of exhaustion. They stayed because of what the room contained, which was the specific, irreplaceable thing that happens between people who have been through something large together and are not yet ready to let go of the version of themselves that existed inside it. Marcus Webb was talking. He had been talking for 20 minutes in the way young soldiers talk, after hard days circling the event, approaching it from different angles, telling the story of what he had seen and experienced as a way of making it real enough to carry. He was describing the moment he had looked up at the rooftop after the shot, the moment he had seen Emily settle back from the scope, and his voice had the quality of a person who is still slightly unable to believe a thing they witnessed with their own eyes. "I'm standing there," he said, "in the middle of the road, and I look up, and I see, I literally see her, and I couldn't move. Davis had to grab my arm. Davis had to grab my arm twice," Davis said from across the table, "because I was also not moving." This produced laughter. Real laughter, the kind that comes from shared recognition, from the acknowledgement that the surprise was universal, that every single person in the room had experienced the same fundamental moment of ground-shifting disorientation. Emily sat with her tea and let them have it. She understood the need for it. The story had to be told and retold in the hours immediately following the event, had to be shaped into something shareable before it could settle into the permanent record of what the unit had been through together. She had been on the receiving end of this kind of storytelling before, after Whitfield, after the Konar mission, after the half-dozen other moments that had become part of the unit's internal mythology. She knew how it worked. She let them work it. Daniel was watching her from across the room, not in a way that was uncomfortable, just watching, the way a person watches something they are still learning the shape of. At 2,140, Morrison stood up, which, in the grammar of this particular group, meant that he had something to say and intended to say it without preamble. Everyone registered it. The room quieted. "I don't do speeches," he said, which was accurate. "So this isn't a speech. It's just something I want said in front of everyone." He looked at Emily. "Doc, what you did today was not a surprise to us. Not because we knew about your background. We didn't. It was not a surprise because in 14 months, you have done exactly what you did today every single time. You saw what was needed and you provided it. The way you provide it. With everything you have." He paused. He was working to keep it short and it was costing him. "We've been calling you Doc for 14 months, like it was a limitation, like it defined the ceiling of what you were to this unit." Another pause. "It never was. You just let us figure that out on our own schedule." He raised his cup. to Captain Carter, who has never once needed us to protect her. The room raised everything it had, cups, bottles, whatever was in hand. Doc, they said. She felt the word differently than she had ever felt it before. Same word, different weight. Everything in it that had always been there, and also now, everything that had been missing. Thank you, she quietly. To all of them, it was enough. At 2,215, the room finally began to empty. People drifted out in ones and twos, carrying the specific satisfied exhaustion of people who had given the day its proper ending. Marcus Webb was the last to leave, and he paused at the door. Doc, he said, get some sleep, Marcus. He smiled. It was the smile of someone who is 22 and has just had the world enlarged in a way that is going to change how he moves through it. Yes, ma'am, he said. And then he was gone. Emily sat in the empty room for a few minutes, not thinking about anything in particular. Just sitting in the aftermath of the day the way you sit in a room after a storm, not because you need to be there, but because the quiet after is its own kind of necessary. Then she went to check on Ryan one more time. He was asleep. His vitals were exactly where they should be. She stood at the foot of his bed for 2 minutes and confirmed what she already knew, and then she went to her own quarters, and she slept without dreaming, which was the best sleep she had gotten in 4 months. 3 days passed. In the specific rhythm of the forward operating base, 3 days was enough time for the immediate intensity of the Dahan Kalan mission to move from the foreground to the middle distance. Not forgotten, nothing like that was forgotten, but absorbed into the ongoing. New briefings came in, new intelligence. The operational picture shifted the way it always shifted, and the unit shifted with it. And life on the base resumed its normal texture of preparation and waiting and the low-grade alertness that never fully switched off. Ryan was recovering in the medical facility. He was, by every metric, an excellent patient in the sense that he did exactly what the medical team told him, never pushed his physical recovery faster than they advised, and maintained his spirits in a way that made everyone who interacted with him feel marginally better about whatever they had been worried about. He was also, in a completely different sense, an absolutely terrible patient because he wanted to know everything that was happening operationally, asked questions about briefings he had no access to, and had developed opinions about the medical facility's card game selection that he shared with anyone who stood still long enough to be subjected to them. Emily visited twice a day, morning and evening. She told herself it was clinical monitoring. Ryan told her it was because she couldn't help herself, which was true, and she told him it was because he couldn't be trusted to accurately report his own symptoms, which was also true, and they were both right, and neither of them pushed it further than that. On the morning of the 4th day, Daniel called her into his office. She sat down. He had a printed document in front of him and the expression of a man who has made a decision and is prepared to own it. I submitted a formal recommendation yesterday, he said, to the brigade commander, recommending that your personnel file be updated to reflect your full qualifications, including your marksmanship background and your performance in Dahan Kalan. She looked at the document. I also recommended, he continued, that you be considered for a specialized assessment that would evaluate the potential for a hybrid operational role, medical and precision fire support, for specific situations where that combination of capability is operationally relevant. She was quiet for a moment. That's not a standard role. No, he said, it isn't. It doesn't exist in the current structure. Also no, he said, which is why it's a recommendation rather than an assignment. He folded his hands on the document. Emily, I am not trying to take the medic away from this unit. I am trying to make sure that the Army knows what it has in you and has the option to use it correctly, whatever correctly turns out to mean in their assessment. She thought about what she had told Colonel Hartley in the debrief, about the complications of dual deployment, about the role clarity that a unit needed in crisis. She had believed what she said then, and she still believed it. Daniel, she said, what happens if they decide that what I am is too complicated to fit into a clean category? He met her eyes. Then they're wrong, he said, and I'll see so. Formally and loudly if necessary, a beat. But I don't think that's what happens. I think what happens is that some very smart people at a level above mine realize that the field has produced something they didn't plan for, and they figure out what to do with it. He leaned back slightly. I've been doing this a long time. The Army is not always fast. It is not always flexible. But when it encounters something genuinely exceptional, it eventually finds a way. It has to. Because the alternative is losing it, and losing exceptional things has a cost. She looked at the document again, at her own name at the top of it. There's something else, he said. She looked up. Colonel Hartley called me this morning. He said it carefully, the way a person delivers news that is significant without being fully clear yet. He's been in contact with a special programs office that I am not at liberty to name in this room without specific clearances neither of us currently have in this context. He paused. What I can tell you is that the kind of capability you demonstrated in Dahan Kalan is something that certain elements of the special operations community have been looking for in a specific configuration for some time. And that Hartley told me, without using any language he wasn't authorized to use, that people are paying attention. The room was very still. Paying attention, she said. Yes, to me specifically. To the Dahan Kalan after-action report specifically, which features your name prominently. He looked at her steadily. I am not telling you what to do with this information. I am telling you so that you have it, because you deserve to have it. She sat with it, the way she sat with everything fully, giving it her actual attention, rather than the performance of attention. She thought about 2013 and the room in Fort Bragg and the choice she had made. She thought about the 14 months of medicine and the rooftop and the single shot and the way the rifle had felt in her hands, like something returning to its natural place. She thought about what Ryan had said, both truths, neither devouring the other. What's the timeline, she asked. No timeline yet, this is early, nothing is decided. I wanted you to know the shape of what might be coming before it came in a form that felt like it was happening to you rather than for you. She nodded slowly. How do you feel about it, he asked. And it was a genuine question, not a procedural one. The question of a person who wanted to know. I don't know yet, she said, which was honest. I'll tell you when I do. He accepted this. That's the right answer, he said. She left his office and walked directly to the medical facility, because some information needs to move through your body before it can be processed by your mind, and moving through a space helps. She walked the familiar route, and she let the information settle the way sediment settles in water slowly, finding its level. Ryan was awake when she arrived. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" "Nothing yet," she said. She pulled the chair and sat. Possibly something, in the future. I don't know the shape of it. Tell me. She told him what Daniel had said. Not all of it, the classified adjacent elements, stayed where they belonged, but the essence of it, the attention. The possible future that was forming at a level above her current operational reality. Ryan listened with the focused stillness he brought to everything important. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, how do you feel about it? Daniel asked the same question. What did you tell him? That I don't know yet. Ryan looked at the ceiling. You know what I think? You're going to tell me regardless. I think you've been carrying a version of yourself that you decided was the right version back in 2013. And it was the right version. I'm not saying it wasn't. But I think you have also been quietly hoping that the version you set aside was still there. Still intact, not diminished. He brought his gaze down. Today proved it was. And now you're trying to figure out whether finding that out changes the choice you made or confirms it. She was very still. Does it? He asked. She thought about it honestly. Both, she said finally. Somehow both. He nodded like that was exactly what he expected to hear. Then you already know what to do, he said. You wait until the shape becomes clearer. And you make the decision you make with the information you have at the time. The same way you make every decision. You make it sound simple. It is simple, he said. It's just not easy. Those are different things. She looked at him. 29-year-old Ryan Mitchell from rural Tennessee, who hunted in the fog and cleaned his rifle in the evenings, and had known she was more than her file said, and had kept that knowledge like a thing held in trust until she was ready for it. How did you get so sensible, she asked. Clean living, he said. In Tennessee. You say that like Tennessee is a philosophy. It is, he said, the best one. She almost laughed. Not almost, she actually did. Small, genuine, the sound of something releasing that had been held too tightly for too long. Ryan smiled. Not the careful, pain-monitoring smile of a man with a chest wound. The real one. There it is, he said. I was starting to think I'd imagined you had one of those. I have one, she said. I'm selective about when I use it. Save it for important occasions, he agreed. Wise policy. She stayed for another 40 minutes. They talked about Tennessee and about Phoenix, where Corporal Whitfield was walking with a cane and sending pictures, and about what recovery looked like at 6 weeks versus 8 and which one Ryan was betting on and whether that bet was medically sound. She told him it was not medically sound and that 6 weeks was optimistic, given the location of the wound, and he said that she clearly didn't know what Tennessee's stubbornness was capable of. She left at 1030 and went back to her duties, and the day moved forward the way days move forward on the base, with the specific combination of urgency and waiting that define this life. At 1,400, Marcus Webb found her in the medical supply room where she was doing inventory, which was the kind of task that required enough attention to keep the hands busy while leaving the mind partially free. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You're going to ask it either way," she said, without turning around. "So go ahead." He came and leaned against the shelving unit across from her. He had the look of someone who has been working up to a question for several days and has finally decided that the alternative to asking is worse than asking. "I keep thinking about what it must have been like," he said. "All those months. Knowing what you knew about yourself. Carrying that, and nobody around you having any idea." She counted a row of IV bags. "It wasn't as heavy as it sounds," she said. "Most of the time. But some of the time, she considered the honest answer. Some of the time, she said, it was exactly as heavy as it sounds." Marcus absorbed this. "Did you ever want to tell someone?" "Ryan almost found out on his own 3 weeks in. I think part of me was relieved when he nearly got there." "Why didn't you just tell him?" "Because I wasn't ready for what would come after the telling," she said. "The telling changes things. Once you've said a thing, you can't unsay it, and everything that follows is shaped by it. I wasn't sure I was ready for the shape of what would follow. And now?" She put down the clipboard. She turned and looked at him. He was 22 years old and asking genuine questions in the way only young people ask genuine questions, without the self-protective hedging that comes with age and experience and the accumulated knowledge of how badly honest answers can land. "Now, I think I spent a lot of time being afraid that revealing what I was would change who I was," she said. "And I was wrong about that. The revealing didn't change anything. It just made what was already true visible." She picked up the clipboard again, which turns out to be a much smaller thing to be afraid of. Marcus stood there for a moment processing this. Then he said, that's actually really helpful." "For what?" He looked at the wall briefly. "I haven't told anyone on the team about something I can do, that I chose not to mention during assignment because I thought it would, I don't know, change how people see me." "Marcus." "Yeah. Are you about to tell me you're secretly a concert pianist?" He blinked. "What? No. I know, fluent in Mandarin, trained fencer, former child actor." He started to say something and then stopped because he could see she was doing it deliberately, and he wasn't entirely sure why. Then he figured it out. His expression shifted. "You're not going to let me turn this into a thing." "I'm not going to let you turn this into a thing," she confirmed. "Because whatever it is, you just heard that revealing what you are doesn't change who you are. So take that information and do something with it." She went back to her inventory. "Start with Brooks. He's the kind of officer who wants to know what his people can do." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That simple? That simple." "Not that easy." He pushed off the shelving. At the door he paused. "Doc, can I ask you one more thing?" "You're going to anyway." "When you picked up that rifle on the rooftop, in that exact moment, what were you thinking?" She didn't answer immediately. She thought about the moment, the weight of the rifle, the scope, the ridge, the calculation that her body made faster than conscious thought, the way deeply trained things happen below the level of deliberate decision. "I was thinking," she said slowly, "about every person on this team who had a family waiting for them. I was thinking about Whitfield and Phoenix. I was thinking about Ryan bleeding out on the roof next to me." She paused. "And I was thinking that the rifle in my hands was the thing that could make the difference between those people going home and not going home. And that I was the person holding it." She looked at the wall. Everything else, what it meant, what it said about me, what would happen after none of that existed in that moment. There was only the problem and the tool and the decision. Marcus stood in the doorway. "That's what it's supposed to be, isn't it?" he said. "That's the thing they're always trying to train into you." "Yes," she said, "and some people never get there. And some people were always there and had to learn how to walk around in regular life with it." He nodded. He left. She stood alone in the supply room, and she finished her inventory, and she thought about what Daniel had told her, and about the attention and the possible future forming at a level above her current reality. She thought about the rifle and the rooftop and the way both truths had fit in her hands without contradiction. She thought about 2013 and the choice, and whether the choice had been right. It had been right. She was more certain of that now than she had been in the years before Dahan Kalan, because Dahan Kalan had shown her the things she had most needed to know. That precision in service of preservation was still precision. That a weapon could be a tool for bringing people home. That the deepest reflex, the one that training had put at the bottom of everything she was the reflex to protect the people next to her. Not a function. A person. A specific, complete person who contained more than one true thing, and had learned that containing them was not a burden but a form of readiness. She put the clipboard down. She thought about Ryan asking for the whole story, about Daniel telling her about the attention from above, about Morrison raising his cup and saying the most reassuring thing he'd heard in 14 months, about Marcus standing in doorways asking questions that deserved real answers. She thought about the team in the common room at 2,200, not wanting to leave. She thought about what it meant to be known, fully known, by people who had chosen to know you and had waited, without knowing they were waiting, for the moment when the knowing became possible. It meant something that did not have a clean name in the language of military service. Something closer to the language that Ryan used when he talked about Tennessee mornings and fog and the specific kind of settled that came from being in a place that knew exactly what it was. She was beginning to feel something like that, not from a place, from a unit, from 14 people who had gone into a broken village in a dangerous valley and come out the other side understanding each other differently, better, with more of the truth between them than before. That was worth everything it had cost. She was sure of it. At 1,600, she got a message from Major Yu. Ryan's recovery metrics had advanced ahead of projection. Not dramatically, not 6 weeks rather than 8, Tennessee's stubbornness or otherwise, but measurably. His body was doing what healthy, well-trained bodies do when given proper care and sufficient rest, and the specific motivation of a person who has decided they are not going to be managed by their injury any longer than the injury strictly requires. She sent Major Yu a note confirming she had received the update. Then she sent Ryan a note that said simply, "Ahead of schedule. Don't get smug." He replied 4 minutes later, Tennessee. She put her phone down. And for the first time in the 4 days since Dahan Kalan, she let herself feel the full weight of what had happened, not the mission, not the shot, not the debrief or the common room or the conversation in Daniel's office, but the thing underneath all of it. The thing that had been waiting to be felt since the moment she picked up the rifle and discovered that 14 months of medicine had not cost her anything she was afraid of losing. She was still who she was. She was more of who she was than she had known. And the people who had seen her on that rooftop, who had watched her hands move from suture to scope without breaking those people, were now the people who knew her most completely of anyone she had served with in her entire career. That was not something she had planned. That was not something that could be planned. That was the kind of thing that only happens in the specific crucible of the worst possible day turning into the day that changes everything. She had been through the worst of it. She was standing in what came after. And what came after, she was discovering, was something she had not expected. It was good. 6 weeks after Dahan Kalan, Ryan Mitchell walked out of the medical facility under his own power. Not with a cane, not leaning on anyone. He walked out the way he walked into every room he had ever entered in his adult life, steady, unhurried, with the specific, quiet confidence of a man who had decided a long time ago that the world was not going to see him move uncertainly through it. Emily was standing in the corridor. She had known he was being discharged at 900. She had reviewed his final metrics herself the night before, confirmed the surgical team's assessment, signed off on the transition documentation. She had done everything clinically correct and professionally complete, and she had also shown up at 848 and been standing in that corridor for 12 minutes before he came through the door. He saw her. He stopped. They looked at each other for a moment. "You're early," she said. "Major Yu kicked me out," he said. "Said I was disrupting the other patients." "Were you?" "I was teaching Davis how to play poker." Davis needed to learn how to play poker. Davis didn't ask to learn how to play poker. Davis didn't know he needed to learn until I started teaching him. He looked at her steadily. "You've been here since before 9. I had paperwork in this building. You finished your paperwork 2 days ago. I heard you tell Morrison." She held his gaze. He held hers. Neither of them said what was actually true, which was that she had shown up because she had been showing up twice a day for 6 weeks, and the habit of it had become something closer to need, and she was not entirely ready to examine what that meant. "You look good," she said, "clinically, professionally." "I feel good," he said, "not clinically, not professionally." He fell into step beside her, and they walked down the corridor the way they had walked, through dozens of corridors over 14 months side by side, in the easy silence that had developed between them before Dahan Kalan and had deepened considerably since. The silence felt different now. It had more in it. More known territory between them, more acknowledged landscape. "Brooks wants to see us both at 1,000, Ryan said. "I know. You know what it's about?" "I have a reasonable guess," she said. He glanced at her sideways. The special programs thing. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. How do you feel about it, he asked. The same question Daniel had asked. The same question he had asked 6 weeks ago in the recovery room. He asked it again because he knew her well enough to know that the answer she gave at 6 weeks out would be different from the answer she gave on the day. She thought about it the way she thought about everything, honestly, fully giving it actual attention. Ready, she said finally. Good, he said. And there was something in the word that was more than agreement. Something that sounded like relief. Like a person who had been waiting for a specific answer and had finally heard it. They walked the rest of the way to Daniel's office in the silence that was not empty. Daniel was at his desk when they came in, and across from him was Colonel Hartley, who had driven 2 hours from the regional command's facility to be present for this specific conversation, which told them both immediately that the shape of what was coming was more defined than Daniel had let on. Hartley stood when they entered. He shook Ryan's hand first. Sergeant Mitchell, good to see you on your feet. Good to be on them, sir, Ryan said. Hartley looked at Emily. Captain Carter, a beat. Sit down, both of you. We have some things to discuss. They sat. Daniel sat. Hartley remained standing the way senior officers sometimes remain standing when they want the room to feel slightly off balance, slightly more alert. I'll be direct, Hartley said. The after-action report from Dahan Kalan has been reviewed at 3 levels above this command. The performance documented in that report, specifically, Captain Carter's generated significant interest in a specialized assessment program that has been under development for approximately 18 months. I cannot provide details about the program in this setting. What I can tell you is that Captain Carter has been formally invited to undergo that assessment. He paused. The invitation is voluntary. It carries no obligation. Acceptance does not guarantee any specific outcome. Declining carries no negative consequence to her current record or assignment. He looked at her. Captain, do you have questions before you respond? The room was very still. Emily sat with her hands in her lap. 6 weeks ago, she had told Ryan she didn't know yet. 4 days after Dahan Kalan, she had told Daniel the same thing. She had spent 6 weeks carrying the question through her daily work and her twice-daily visits to Ryan's recovery room and her conversations with Marcus and Morrison, and every quiet moment between the operational demands, continuing to do her job in a unit that still needed her. She had arrived at the answer gradually, not dramatically. The way you arrive at most true things, not in a single moment of revelation, but in the slow accumulation of small certainties that eventually become undeniable. One question, she said, will this unit still have a medic? Hartley looked at her. Something moved in his expression appreciation, possibly for the specific direction of the question. That is not within my authority to determine, he said. But it is the right question, and it will be in my report that you asked it first. She nodded. Then yes, she said, I accept the assessment. The room breathed. Daniel picked up his coffee mug. He didn't drink from it. He just held it in both hands the way he always held it, when he needed something to do with them. Ryan sat completely still beside her, and she felt, rather than saw, the very small exhale that moved through. When she said yes, the specific physical release of a person who has been holding a breath they didn't know they were holding. Good, Hartley said. He said it the way a man says a thing he has been waiting to say for some time. The assessment is in 8 weeks. Fort Bragg, 2 weeks of evaluation. I will have the full documentation to you by end of week. He looked at Ryan. Sergeant Mitchell, your recovery timeline places you at full operational status in approximately 2 weeks. Major Brooks will address your reassignment at that point. Understood, sir, Ryan said. Hartley gathered his materials. He shook hands with each of them in turn. At the door, he stopped. He turned back, and he did something that nobody in the room had expected from a man who had spent 40 minutes being precise and measured and military. He looked at Emily directly and he said, Captain, for what it's worth, and I recognize it may not be worth much coming from a man who read about what you did rather than witnessed it. What you did in that valley was the kind of thing people spend their entire careers hoping to be capable of. The whole of it. Not just the shot, the whole of it. He paused. I wanted you to hear that from someone whose job is to assess these things, and who is telling you it was exceptional by any standard I know how to apply. He left before she could respond. The door closed. The three of them sat in the specific silence that follows something significant. Then Ryan said Tennessee. It was so perfectly timed and so completely Ryan that Emily felt the laugh come out of her before she could manage it. And Daniel, who had been maintaining his measured commander's expression with visible effort, cracked at the corners of his mouth in a way that he would later deny constituted an actual smile. Get out of my office, Daniel said. Both of you. I have actual work to do. They got out of his office. In the corridor, Ryan and Emily walked side by side again, and this time the silence between them had something new in it. Something that had shifted the moment she said yes in that room. A door that had been standing slightly ajar for 6 weeks had opened fully, and the air on the other side of it was different. Fort Bragg, Ryan said. Fort Bragg, she said. You were at Fort Bragg in 2013. Yes. Is that going to be strange? Going back. She thought about it. Probably, she said, and then probably not. Those are different things. He laughed. She had told him that herself, and he was giving it back to her, and she recognized it immediately. You're going to be fine, he said. Everyone keeps telling me that, because everyone keeps being right. He glanced at her. What are you going to do with the 8 weeks before? My job, she said. Exactly what I've been doing. Nothing else? No preparation? No, I don't know. Reviewing old material? She stopped walking. He stopped with her. She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him when he asked questions that deserved more than a walking answer. Ryan, the assessment is going to evaluate what I already am, not what I can construct in 8 weeks. She held his gaze. I know what I am now. I didn't fully before Dahan Kalan. I do now. A pause. That's the only preparation that was ever going to matter. He held her gaze for a long moment. Yeah, he said. Yeah, okay. They started walking again. At the junction where their paths diverged, her toward the medical facility, him toward the unit's operational area where he had not stood for 6 weeks, and to which he was very clearly eager to return, they stopped. Doc, he said. She looked at him. When you come back from Fort Bragg, he said it with the confidence of someone who has not considered the alternative. And whatever they decide about what happens next, whatever role, whatever structure, whatever they call what you are going forward. He paused. You're still Doc. It was a simple thing. It should not have landed the way it landed. But it landed like something structural, like a foundation stone being placed, like the specific kind of certainty that only comes from someone who has earned the right to offer it. She held it for a moment. I know, she said. He nodded once. He turned and walked toward the operational area. She watched him go. Then she turned and walked toward the medical facility. Because there was a patient with a post-operative infection that needed monitoring and 2 routine assessments that needed completing, and a supply order that had been delayed 3 days and needed her direct involvement to get unstuck. Her job, exactly what she had been doing, the same work, the same steady hands, the same full attention. And underneath all of it, the thing that Dahan Kalan had confirmed and Hartley had named, and Ryan had carried for her through 6 weeks of recovery. And Morrison had said in the middle of the common room in front of everyone, she had always been this. The work continued. 2 weeks later, Ryan Mitchell returned to full operational status. His reinstatement assessment was the highest score he had posted since joining the unit, which was the kind of thing that happened when a person spent 6 weeks unable to do the physical work they were built for, and then was finally allowed to do it again. He moved through the qualification course with the focused intensity of someone making a point, not to anyone watching, just to himself, to the body that had been shot and repaired and needed to know it was still itself. Emily watched the assessment from the observation position. Not officially. She was there because she had cleared him medically, and she was verifying with her own eyes that the clearance was correct, which was a clinical justification that was also entirely true and also not the whole truth. He finished the course. He looked up at the observation position. He saw her. She held up one finger, one hand, a small gesture that meant exactly what they both knew it meant, which was that his time was what she expected, and his form was what she expected, and everything was as it should be, and she was satisfied. He nodded once. He went back to his unit. She went back to hers. At 1,800 that evening, Marcus Webb knocked on her door. She opened it. He had the expression he had been wearing periodically for the past 6 weeks, the one that said he had something to tell her and had been working up to it for longer than was strictly necessary. I talked to Brooks, he said. She waited, I told him. He shifted his weight. The thing I mentioned in the supply room. The skill I hadn't disclosed. And he exhaled, long and slow. He was quiet for about 10 seconds, which felt like 10 years, and then he said he was going to update my file and that he appreciated me telling him. Marcus looked at the wall briefly. That's it. That's all that happened. He just accepted it. And updated my file, yes. Emily said, that is generally what happens. He stared at her. You knew it was going to go like that. I had a reasonable guess. Doc. His voice had something in it that was between exasperation and gratitude, which was a combination she had noticed was specifically available to 22-year-old soldiers, discovering that the adults they trusted had been right. Why didn't you just tell me it was going to go like that? Because you needed to find out yourself, she said. That's a different kind of knowing. He stood there for a moment. Then he nodded. Slowly, the nod of a person filing a lesson in a place where it would stay. Is there anything else? She asked. No, he said. I wanted to tell you, because you're the one who told me to. I know, she said. Thank you for telling me. He left. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of her bunk and she thought about Marcus Webb telling Brooks the thing he had been afraid to tell, and about what that cost and what it produced and what it meant that the cost was so much smaller than the fear of it. She thought about how long she had carried her own version of that same disproportion, the weight of the hidden thing expanding in the dark, larger than its actual dimensions because it lived in a space where it couldn't be measured against reality. Dahan Kalan had measured it against reality. The weight had turned out to be exactly what it was and nothing more, and the people who had seen it had not been diminished by it and had not needed to be protected from it, and had in fact been carrying it with her, unknowingly, for all the months before. She thought about something her father had told her. In the backyard in Virginia, when she was 15 years old and had just made a shot she didn't think she was capable of making. He had said, "The shot doesn't teach you that you can do something new. It teaches you that you could always do it. You just hadn't done it yet." She had thought about that sentence many times over the years. She was thinking about it now, in a different way than she ever had before. Dahan Kalan had not made her into something new. It had shown her what she had always been. She had just not done it yet, not the full version, not all at once, not with everyone watching and everyone knowing. Now they knew, and now she knew that them knowing had cost her exactly nothing that mattered, and given her something she had not known she was missing until it was present. The 8 weeks moved with the particular speed of time that is filled with purpose. She worked, she monitored, she prepared her medical protocols and ran her assessments and kept her unit healthy and functional and ready. She had 2 conversations with Hartley's office about the assessment logistics. She had 1 phone call with a voice she didn't recognize who asked her 3 questions about her marksmanship background in a way that told her the 8 weeks were not fully preparatory, and the assessment had already, in some sense, begun. She answered the 3 questions directly. She suspected she answered them correctly. She did not spend time worrying about whether she had. Ryan came to see her on the evening before she left for Fort Bragg. He knocked. She opened the door. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, which was exactly what Cole had been holding in a corridor 6 weeks ago, which made her think that the men in this unit communicated in coffee the way other people communicated in words, and she was not sure she minded. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes," she said. No hesitavus. "I didn't say that." He looked at her. "You're nervous." "I'm appropriately alert to the significance of the situation," she said, "which is different from nervous, Doc." That's the most military way I've ever heard anyone say they're nervous. She drank her coffee. "Fine. Yes, slightly," he said. "Slightly nervous is right. It means you care about the outcome. I always care about the outcome. I know." He held his cup in both hands the way Daniel held his, which she had noticed before, and wondered about whether it was something soldiers learned or something they arrived at independently. "What's the outcome you want?" She thought about it. "I want the assessment to see what's there and report it accurately," she said. "And then I want the people who read that report to make a decision that puts the right skill in the right place. And if the right place is back here exactly as you've been, then I'll be back here exactly as I've been," she said. "And that will have been the right call. And if it's something else," she held her cup, "then it'll be something else. And I'll be whatever the situation requires." She looked at him. "I stopped being afraid of that a while ago." He nodded. He understood which while ago she meant. He had been on the rooftop. They drank their coffee in the silence. It was full of everything they had been through together, and everything they didn't need to say about it, which was the best kind of silence, the kind that only accumulates between people who have given each other enough honest language that the silence can be trusted to hold the rest. At 5:30 the next morning, Emily Carter stood in the corridor outside her quarters, with her bag and her orders, and everything she needed for 2 weeks at Fort Bragg. The corridor was empty at that hour, or it should have been. Morrison was there. He was leaning against the opposite wall, with his arms crossed, awake and fully dressed at 5:30, which was not unusual for Morrison but was still notable, given that he had no operational requirement to be in that corridor at that hour. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he said, "You're going to walk in there and you're going to show them exactly what you showed us in Dahan Kalan." and they're going to see what we saw. He paused. And then they're going to have to figure out what to do with someone who is more than any category they currently have, which is going to be their problem, not yours. Another pause. Your problem is just to be yourself. That's not a problem, she said. No, he agreed. It really isn't. She picked up her bag. Cole appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving toward her with the purposeful stride of someone who was also not operationally required to be in that corridor at 530. Behind him, Davis, and behind Davis, Hendricks and Chen. She stopped. They were all there. Every member of the unit who had been in Dahan Kalan and who was currently on base and not on a scheduled operational requirement, which was all of them, because she understood now that Daniel had arranged it that way. And she was furious about it in the way that you are furious about things that move you too much to be comfortable with. She stood in the corridor and looked at the faces of the people she had spent 14 months carrying and being carried by, and she felt the specific weight of what they were doing, not making a ceremony of it, not creating a moment, just being present, showing up, the way they showed up for everything that mattered. She looked at the end of the corridor. Daniel was there, coffee mug in hand. And beside him, Ryan Mitchell, who absolutely had no operational reason to be awake and mobile at 530, given that he had returned to full status 2 weeks ago and had a 700 briefing that required him to be rested, and who was standing there anyway, with the specific, unstoppable quality of a man from Tennessee, who had decided he was going to be in a certain corridor at a certain time and had not consulted anyone about whether that was practical. She looked at him, he looked at her. Tennessee, she said. He smiled. The real one. Tennessee, he said. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. She looked at all of them, one at a time, the way she had looked at them across 14 months of missions and debriefs and hard nights and harder mornings. The faces she knew completely. The people who had let her know them and had, in the end, known her back in equal measure. She did not make a speech. She was not a speech kind of person. She never had been. She said, take care of each other. It was what a medic said. It was what she had always said. It was also now the most complete thing she knew how to express, which was that the unit was the unit, and the unit was what mattered, and everything she had done for 14 months had been in service of the thing those 3 words describe. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said immediately. The way he said everything now certain, without hesitation. He had grown into something in 6 weeks, this 22-year-old from Columbus, Ohio. She had watched it happen. She was glad she had been there to watch it. The others nodded. Cole raised his chin. Morrison uncrossed his arms and stood straight, which from Morrison was the equivalent of a salute. Daniel raised his coffee mug for the last time. She turned and walked to the transport that was waiting outside. She did not look back, not because the looking back was too hard, because she didn't need to. She carried them with her the way she carried everything that mattered completely, attentively, with the full weight of real care. At Fort Bragg 2 weeks later, the assessment concluded on a Thursday morning. The evaluating officer, a woman named Colonel Sandra Walsh, who had 30 years in Army Special Operations and the specific economy of a person who did not use language for any purpose except precision, delivered her assessment verbally before the formal documentation was complete. She sat across from Emily in a small room with a table between them, and she looked at Emily the way Emily had learned to recognize as the look of a person who has seen what they needed to see and is deciding how to say it. Captain Carter, Walsh said. In 30 years, I have run approximately 240 assessments of this type. I have recommended advancement for 63 of those candidates. She paused. You are not like any of the 63. Emily waited. You are not like any of the 240, Walsh said. What you represent is a specific combination of trained capabilities and personal philosophy that produces an operational profile I have not encountered in this configuration. She folded her hands on the table. The question I have been asking for 2 weeks is not whether you are exceptional. That was clear in Dahan Kalan and confirmed here. The question is what to do with exceptional in a structure that was not designed to hold it. And Emily said. Walsh said, we're going to have to build something new. A pause, which is not as daunting as it sounds. We've done it before when the situation required it. The situation requires it now. She looked at Emily steadily. You will return to your unit. You will continue in your medical role. And concurrently, a specialized advisory and assessment function is going to be developed around your specific capability profile, which you will help design. Because you are the only person who fully understands the intersection of what you can do. Questions? Walsh asked. Emily said, will the people I help design this with understand that the medical role is not secondary. Walsh's expression did something at the edges. Captain, the medical role is the reason this works. Remove it, and you have a shooter. Extraordinary, but not unique. The combination is what's unprecedented, she stood. No, the medical role is not secondary. It is, in our assessment, the source of everything that makes the rest of it possible. She extended her hand. Emily shook it. She left the building, and she stood in the Fort Bragg air for a moment, the same air she had breathed in 2013 when she had made the choice that had led, through 14 months in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan and one specific morning in a broken village in a dangerous valley, to this specific moment. She thought about her father's sentence. The shot doesn't teach you that you can do something new. It teaches you that you could always do it. She thought about Ryan on the rooftop, about the rifle in her hands and the weight of it coming home, about the shot that had opened the battlefield and brought the team through and proved the thing she had most needed to prove to herself, which was that the two halves of who she was could exist in the same hands without destroying each other. She thought about Morrison saying the most reassuring thing he'd heard in 14 months. She thought about Marcus Webb in doorways asking questions that deserved real answers. She thought about Daniel raising his coffee mug. She thought about Ryan. Still you. You've been you this whole time. She took out her phone. She typed one message to one person. It said, "They're building something new. I'm helping design it. See you at 900 Monday." She sent it to Ryan Mitchell. The response came in 40 seconds. It said, "Tennessee knew you could do it." She put her phone in her pocket. She looked at the sky above Fort Bragg, which was wide and blue, and the same sky that was over Dahan Kalan and over her father's backyard in Virginia and over every place she had ever stood, and decided what she was going to do next. She was not just a medic. She had never been just a medic. She was not just a shooter. She had never been just that either. She was Captain Emily Carter, who had spent years learning that the most powerful thing a person could be was completely, unapologetically, and unreservedly themselves, and who had finally, in the worst valley on the worst day in front of all the people who needed her most, proved it in a way that left no room for doubt. She was the person who saved lives with her hands and protected them with her eyes, and carried both truths forward into every room she walked into. She was the soldier who had chosen compassion not because she couldn't fight, but because she understood more deeply than anyone who had underestimated her ever would that the point was never to win. The point was for everyone to come home, and they had. Every single one.